There's a big debate about what is and is not acceptable censorship on social media giants like Twitter and Facebook. And at the heart of this story is an article that was written by the New York Post. Now, to be clear, the article is sketchy. I certainly agree with that. But I'm gonna preface this story by saying that I don't believe that the social media giants should have censored this story. I think it's actually created a lot more attention toward the story. And it has to do with Joe Biden. So Facebook and Twitter took unusual steps to limit readership of an article by the New York Post about alleged emails from Joe Biden's son. The social media giants took that action before verifying the contents of the article, in which President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, and his former top advisor, Stephen Bannon, claimed to have obtained and leaked a trove of private materials from Hunter Biden. The leaked documents suggested at one point he gave a Ukrainian executive the opportunity to meet with former Vice President Joe Biden. The Biden campaign said his schedule indicated no such meeting took place. Now, at the heart of this story is basically the New York Post regurgitating the same narrative that we heard from Donald Trump during the time he was being investigated for impeachment. During that time, he claimed that Joe Biden worked unilaterally to fire a Ukrainian prosecutor who was investigating Burisma, which was a fossil fuel company in Ukraine. Apparently, they were accused of wrongdoing, and Viktor Shokin was the prosecutor who was allegedly doing this investigation. The issue is that story is not true. It's just fundamentally false because the international community wanted Viktor Shokin out. It turned out that he was corrupt and was not doing the proper investigation of Burisma. However, I also want to note that yeah, it looks pretty bad when you have Hunter Biden serving on the board of Burisma while Joe Biden is the vice president. Now, Cenk, I want to open this up to you, and then I'll give the audience some more details about who Viktor Shokin is and what conservatives have said about him in the media.
Yeah. So guys, there's two completely different things to be concerned about here. One is the substance of the article. Just right before we went on air, two news stories broke. One is on a far right message board. Apparently the same story was going around a couple of days before the New York Post published it. So somehow these far right folks on the internet knew about this story before a so-called mainstream media outlet like the New York Post got it. So when you see it on those message boards, that is a huge red flag that it might not be real. Now, the second thing that broke is that they said originally in the New York Post story, and their sources are Giuliani and Steve Bannon. It almost can't get worse in terms of lack of credibility. Rudy Giuliani, I believe, belongs in a literal insane asylum at this point. And so if he said to me, the grass is green and the sky is blue, I'd go double check. So I don't blame the social media networks for wanting to check. I'll get to that in a second. But they said, the laptop was dropped off by someone else, and they just happened to know that it was Hunter Biden's. Now they have officially changed the story, and Giuliani comes out and goes, "Yeah, it was Hunter Biden who dropped it off." Wait a minute. So you were lying in the beginning. So apparently there was good reason to believe that you should urge caution to folks about this story. But at the same time, I understand what Anna's saying, because once you start blocking stories based on, things that are not legitimate. And that's the thing we don't know, right? We gotta be fair, we're gonna cover all angles. Twitter says, hey, look, we have a policy against publishing anything that was hacked. And it's clearly not their computer. And they retrieved pictures and memorandum from the computer that looks like a hack. That's why we paused it. And Facebook says we paused it to verify the facts. If it's just a pause, I think I agree. I think these guys are not credible. I don't care that it's in the New York Post. I have no respect for the New York Post, nor should anyone else. On the other hand, if these guys have me give off the appearance of working for the Democratic Party, that is toxic. And obviously none of us here are fans of the Republican Party, but be careful who you give power to and who they're going to ban and censor next.
I just think that both companies made a mistake, and beyond a mistake, because they have now created a situation in which the Republican Party, and they're professionals at this, can pretend like they're aggrieved, that they're true victims. You have people like Senator Ted Cruz talking about, oh, poor us, we're constantly censored on social media. Of course, there's never any media attention toward all of the anti-fascist accounts that get shut down on Twitter on a regular basis every time they do a sweep of QAnon conspiracy theorists. And it's because, people on the left are not professional victims. Republicans love to play professional victims. But I will say, look, how are we going to allow these corporations essentially to be the arbiters of what is and is not acceptable content on their platforms? These platforms are incredibly powerful. People rely on these platforms, unfortunately, to get their news. And we can't have members of a corporate board or a CEO decide unilaterally what is and is not acceptable on their platform, right? This is part of the reason why you have Democrats who want to break up these companies or find a solution to this, because again, they are too powerful and people do rely on them for news. At the same time, the fact checking is an interesting approach, but remember, Facebook's independent fact checkers includes people from the Daily Caller. I know that that's not gonna make me feel comfortable. So it really is a difficult situation, but I think in this case, they made a giant mistake by preventing this article from being tweeted about or posted on Facebook. I didn't care about the story, I didn't care to read about it until they banned it, and then I read it. And as you read it and you investigate it further, you know it's nonsense. Of course, idiots like Rudy Giuliani can't keep his story straight. And so how about we fight back with facts and evidence rather than try to censor it, which again draws more attention to it.
Yeah, look, I think the main problem here is that Democrats put so much pressure on the social media outlets. And so that's why when a story like this breaks, the perception immediately, and the Republican whining, as Anna's pointing out, the perception then becomes, oh, the social media outlets are banning things based on what the Democratic Party wants. And that's what I'm calling toxic. But the reality is they probably could have handled this better if they were just clearer about it. Jack Dorsey, who started Twitter, said something similar on Twitter, of course, where he said, look, guys, at least we should have put out a better statement explaining why we're doing it. If the first thing I read about it is because Twitter's worried about a hack, I would have thought, well, that makes sense, right? If the first thing I had read about it is Facebook is taking 24 hours to verify the story because of concerns about the sources, that would make sense. By the way, why are people flipping out about this and not just the Republicans? Because New York Post is considered part of the mainstream media. So the rest of the mainstream media goes, hey, we were telling you to ban Trump supporters and progressives later, okay, but we weren't telling you to ban us. So that's why people got touchy about it. And finally, look, to be fair to the social media platforms, it is a super tough balancing act because people are legitimately worried about fake news and it spreads like wildfire on Facebook. That's true, it is, right? And the Russians and all the things that happened in the election. I think the Russians are a really minor part of the story in 2016, but the fake news is a giant part of the story, and that does happen. So people asked them to regulate on that, and there was some logic on that. They did. Now people are concerned they over-regulated a little bit, but they are stuck in the middle. And so there's constantly people yelling at them from all directions saying, regulate, don't regulate, regulate, don't regulate. So if they made an error here in degree, I'm more understanding of that, as long as going forward, when they do something like this, they have a very clear standard and then they apply it evenly, whether it's a mainstream media outlet or not, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, or people challenging both of those parties from the outside.
And final thing, because I promised, I do want to give you the details and the reminder of who Viktor Shokin from Ukraine actually is and how I knew this story was nonsense from the second I started reading the details of it, which is why, again, if Democrats were good at messaging, they would fight back against this ridiculous narrative, especially when you had conservatives at the time that Donald Trump was being investigated for impeachment, speaking out and writing against Viktor Shokin. I'm gonna give you a few examples. This is from Tom Rogan, who is not related to Joe Rogan, but does write for Washington Examiner, a conservative outlet. He wrote, Shokin was a true Ukrainian swamp creature, corrupt as all get out. I've never heard that phrase before, but it's fun. If he was right in investigating Hunter Biden, then it was only by accident. While Republicans say that Biden's 2015 to 2016 pressure to fire Shokin was about protecting Hunter, there is no substantial evidence for that accusation. And there is significant evidence for an alternative, excusable explanation. Biden threatened to withhold up to $1 billion in aid from Ukraine unless Shokin was fired because of Shokin's deep corruption. Again, this is a conservative writing this for a conservative outlet last year as the impeachment investigation was ongoing. Acting to protect his allies' financial interests, Shokin prevented effective investigation of corrupt figures. Street protests against the prosecutor were regular, and in February of 2016, Shokin's direct deputy resigned in protest at the prosecutor's office becoming a hotbed of corruption. Biden was right to push him out. It wouldn't have happened otherwise. Ukrainian corruption is a big problem. And so the Biden campaign can easily cite all of this evidence, right? And look, I think it's rich for Donald Trump and his campaign to use conservative media like the New York Post to accuse Biden of corruption. And again, I do admit that Hunter Biden working on the board of Burisma was awful and it does not look good and stuff like that shouldn't be happening. However, at the same time, we're talking about a president, Donald Trump, who has literally and transparently fired prosecutors here in the United States, law enforcement officials here in the United States who were investigating him. So he has no leg to stand on. The problem here is that Democrats are too afraid to fight. If they were good at fighting, then they wouldn't need to rely on any type of censorship in order to prevent these types of stories from coming out.
Yeah, so this is an attempt by the Republicans to do whataboutisms. Oh, Trump might have broken dozens of laws, including ones we just found out about in terms of the taxes and campaign finance violations from back in 2016 in lending his own campaign $30 million, but not from him, but from his partner. I mean, it goes on and on. Dozens of legal violations and law breaking by Donald Trump. They go, squirrel, Hunter Biden, son of Joe Biden, might have done something in a laptop we might or might not have found from him or not. This is not anywhere near equivalent. And I want to give the last word to one of our members because I love doing the show with you guys and it's a great point. Eclectic Miscellaneous says, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube have so much wrong with them, but they're essential now to make sure that voices like TYT are heard. When corporations are deciding what is or isn't truth, should or shouldn't be published, everyone except corporations and the establishment will lose in the long term. Look, I want you guys to remember that, and that's a great point because before these platforms were around, all we had was the gatekeepers. So NBC, CBS, Fox News, ABC, you name it. And those gatekeepers never, ever let progressives on. So you gotta remember that as well. So I don't wanna go back to the bad old days where the elites and the establishment decided who had a voice and who didn't. Now, because of those platforms, you guys get to decide who has a voice and not. That's why I love doing it with the members. If you're on YouTube, you could hit the join button below to become a member. Everyone else, you could go to tyt.com/join. And as you can tell, you make this show happen.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.